All right, hey everybody. Thanks for joining today. It's June 6th and it's TAM Lab 24, Skyline Collector Deployment. And let's welcome Brian and Nick to the session today. And they're gonna cover the deployment and configuration of Skyline Collector and the process to connect to the CSP. And this is really good timing, right? As Skyline has matured a lot and they're providing more and more value to our customers as well as ourselves, right, the TAMs. And so I would expect this becomes more integral into how we TAM. So it's, again, really exciting. And so that's everything I got. So at this point, I'm gonna hand it over, I'll stop my sharing and hand it over to Nick. And again, Nick and Brian, thank you. Thank you so much for your time. So hop on.
Perfect, thanks everyone. Quick intro for those who don't know me, Nick Fritsch, Technical Marketing Manager within Global Services. Previously a TAM for 3 years, so know many of you by name, and for those I don't, I look forward to meeting you. And then again, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to reach out to me, email, Slack, etc. More than happy to help in any way. So to kick things off, what I wanted to do is go through the cloud services org creation. That's kind of the first step in deploying Skyline for a customer who is not using cloud services today. So we're going to walk through that process, talk to a few things, and then I'll hand it over to Brian to go through kind of the Skyline Collector deployment, as well as an overview of Skyline Advisor that he's previously set up. So you should be seeing here, this is our Skyline Get Started page. Easy URL, skyline.vmware.com/get-started. It'll take them to this page from a customer perspective. And to kick things off, all they have to do is click this Get Started Now button. So I'm just going to scroll through this video. They click Get Started Now. It takes them into brings them to this page. I'm using a Skyline Demo account in this instance. So I already have multiple cloud services organizations already created. Most customers will not see those pre-existing organizations. What they will only see is that Create New Organization button down there at the bottom. So that's what they're going to want to choose from the perspective of creating a cloud services organization for Skyline.
Hey, Nick, real quick question. From an entitlement perspective, I remember when Skyline was first announced and released general availability, it was just kind of a preview for certain customers, right? And they had to be on the list. At this point, it's open to all production support customers, correct?
Correct. Open to all production support and Premier Services customers globally. There are a few customers that we don't necessarily recommend adopt. For instance, federal customers, they have unique requirements with regards to where data is stored, data access, etc. So we are working to overcome those challenges so that they can adopt. But for the most part, a very large majority of our customers, production support and Premier Services, they are free to adopt using this wizard right here.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. So customer clicks on that new organization, create new organization button. That'll pop them into a Skyline wizard. So the first step is creating that organization. So this value here, the organization name, is a user entered value. So I think I've used Skyline Demo TAM Lab. We recommend the customer enter a valuable name such as company name and then the team, Acme, vSphere team, or just Acme Corporation. This will default to the person who's logged in organization. So if it was me, it would default to Nick Fritsch organization. That's not very meaningful to the customers, not very meaningful to technical support as we can search upon that organization name. So we want them to enter a meaningful organization name here that references their company.
Now, quick question on that point. Are the customers able to change that organization name?
They are.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
One other question. If a customer has never set up an organization in our cloud services portal, how do you recommend they go about doing that? Should it be the super user that does it, or can anybody do it, or what should be our advice to our customers?
So James, correct me if I'm wrong. It's basically any individual who's on the EA within my VMware that has open ASR rights within my VMware. So we leverage the My VMware backend from a user perspective so they can log in using their My VMware username and password in the cloud services. And then it's just any individual that's on that enterprise agreement that from a support entitlement perspective. So if they wanted to tie Premier Services to this, we would want an individual who's on that BCS contract, for those 6 individuals, to go through this process, because that'll tie them back to that Premier Services contract that they have.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep, great question. And then future steps, you'll kind of see where that happens. Yeah, organization name, they will need to add an address. So enter in, they can click the add address button here, and that will pop them into an add address where they can fill in their organization's addresses. A couple things to note here, and I call it out here for global customers. For instance, here I've called up United Kingdom. It will ask for a tax ID. That's a byproduct of cloud services, since most of our services there are a cost, or there's a payment method for it. For the instances of Skyline, since it is available at no additional cost, they can choose I'm not sure, since we don't necessarily require that for Skyline. Additionally, note there that it does pull up the country's currency. Again, this can be confusing to customers. Again, a byproduct of cloud services. We do not charge, we do not require payment details, credit card, et cetera, as part of this deployment process. So you can put customers at ease that they will not be charged in any way, and they can choose I'm not sure. And again, we're actually working on making this disappear within cloud services in the future. Scrolling forward, I'm just going to choose our headquarter address here in this instance. Again, it just pulls up the dollar, the currency for the country chosen. Again, that can be ignored. They agree to the terms of service, click continue. Now we go into a Skyline organization wizard. It's 6 steps. The first step here, so going to the point of support entitlement, this will utilize the logged in my VMware email and password. So whoever that user is, it's myself, the customer. When they click that associate support entitlement, it'll go back to our my VMware backend and determine what that support entitlement is. It does that automatically. In this instance, my VMware email and password is tied to a Premier Services entitlement, so we show that here for the customer. So here in this instance, if the customer sees production and they expect Premier, they can stop and reevaluate with regards to moving forward. But we do show that here, so that's an automatic entitlement assigned to that cloud services organization.
So if a customer has multiple organizations, if they're tied to multiple EAs, it will take the highest entitlement.
Got it. So then, does this tie back to what you were saying earlier, Nick, about if somebody has BCS, you want one of the 6 people to do this because it will show BCS?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Cool.
Yep. So once they've done that, we go to the next step. The next 2 steps are really downloading the Skyline Collector and installing it. So here's just a hyperlink to download the Skyline Collector. It bounces you into my VMware where the Skyline Collector download resides. They may need to log in again. We are trying to work around that as well and make this as easy as possible. The next step is basically just a hyperlink to the installation configuration guide on VMware Docs. So that's just a hyperlink just to help with that installation of the Skyline Collector. Going to the next step, so the registration token. So this is the step that ties the Skyline Collector to this cloud services organization and tells us who the customer is. So that mapping from collector to organization to the customer and their support entitlement is basically done here. So the customer creates a registration token here by clicking the create new token. They can copy this collector token, and this is used within the collector deployment, which Brian will show you here in just a few minutes. Note that that collector token is good for 12 hours, so they don't need to bounce directly over to the collector installation immediately. They have a bit of time there or leeway to perform that collector installation. And additionally, if they don't get to it in 12 hours, they can come back to this wizard. So basically go back to skyline.vmware.com/get-started. Once they log in, they won't have to do the reassociation of the support entitlement. That'll already be completed. They can go straight to step 4 and create another new token. The customer doesn't have to think if they didn't do the process in 12 hours, they can always go back and create a new token. That's not a showstopper. So again,
Hey,
Brian
Nick,
will show you. Yeah.
If you're going to be deploying multiple collectors in an environment, do they each need their own unique token?
Yes.
Okay.
Once you use a token, it's basically discarded. So in that instance, if they're deploying a second class collector, same process I'm showing here. Again, the support entitlement won't matter. That'll already be associated. They just come back to step 4 and create another new token.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Additionally, and it's worth calling out, within cloud services, which I don't believe I show here, but we can show it towards the end. When you go into cloud services, you will see the Skyline Advisor button within cloud services. There will also be a Skyline Collector button that takes them into this same wizard as well. So in the instance that the customer's already deployed it, they see Skyline Advisor, they see Skyline Collector. They can click on that Skyline Collector button. It brings them back into, again, this same screen. They can go straight to step 4, create a new token. They proceed the next step. They can manage existing collectors. So what we have here is primarily for customers who previously deployed on the 1.x version of the collector, and they need to migrate those collectors into cloud services so that we can recognize them. So that option will be available here. Any previously deployed collectors on the 1.x version, there'll be an action here. The collector will show up, and there'll be an action button that says migrate. And that basically just brings the collector underneath the cloud services organization. The other option available here that customers will have is if a customer deployed a collector and then for some reason either just deleted it, removed it from inventory, deleted it from disk within VCenter, it still shows up. It'll still show up if they do that within Skyline as an unhealthy collector. What they can do is they can go in here and actually do a deregistration of that collector. So it's basically removed from their Skyline inventory. So again, they can access the screen through that Skyline Collector service or through the Get Started to perform those steps. And then finally, once that basically completes the creation of the cloud services organization, associating the entitlement, downloading, installing the collector, registering it. Now I'm going to hand it off to Brian, and he'll walk through the collector deployment as well as an overview of the advisor. Those are the kind of the next steps in the Skyline deployment.
Cool. Thanks, Nick. All right. Just shared my screen. Can you guys see it yet?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Normally I get like a green highlight around the border, but I don't see that today, so. Cool, so I've got some notes here, and I'll get these over to you, Bill, after the webinar so you can store them with the recording.
Thank you.
But just have a couple steps that I have taken care of in advance. I created a couple DNS records. As Nick said, we did deploy one Skyline collector so that we could already have data pre-populated in the advisor to show that off at the end. It typically takes like, I don't know what the specific time is, but maybe 24 to 48 hours before data actually starts showing up in the advisor. So we wanted to have that done in advance. So one collector is already deployed. We'll be adding a second collector. And then I created two service accounts, one for the initial collector and one for the collector we'll walk through. So after, and Nick, this may be one more step that you had done. After you created the organization, I believe you granted my account access to it.
Correct. So yeah, so I did. Since I created the organization, the original organization, I gave you access to go through these steps. The organization owner, whoever created that organization will have the full rights to do whatever they need. Where they would need to grant additional access is, again, if they wanted to invite additional team members to either access Advisor or have the availability to add additional collectors or manage the collectors. So that's step 4 and 5 that I showed here just a few minutes ago. You would add those within cloud services.
Cool. And so after Nick did those steps, I've received this automated email that shows that I was granted admin access to Skyline Advisor and user role to Skyline Collector. And the Skyline Collector is a link, and I've included the link here in the notes. But this is very similar to the screen that Nick just showed. So I'll close that. Difference here, I've already been, or this organization has already been associated with a support entitlement. That was a step that Nick had done. So that's already complete, so I don't need to do anything there. On the next step, it talks about downloading a Skyline collector. I've already completed that step. So now we're into the space where we would actually deploy the appliance. So we're gonna do that, and then while it is deploying, we'll go through and make sure that the service account that we have is granted permissions to all of the products that we're gonna add in. So like I said, I've already deployed or already downloaded the OVF. Deploying it is pretty straightforward. We just right click inside of the web client, say we want to deploy an OVF. We browse to that downloaded file. We give it a name. We'll call this services Skyline 02. Alrighty. We accept our license agreement. We use thin provision. We'll pick a network. And then we have to feed in some information. So first thing being a root password. So I'll just use the super clever VMware 1 exclamation mark. I'll throw my notes over on this other screen. And we'll go through and type in the default gateway. We'll leave the domain name blank, that blank. And some comma separated DNS servers. We'll give it an IP address. And a subnet mask. And we'll hit finish. Doesn't take a super long time. I think last time this took 3 or 4 minutes. But while it's doing its thing, we can move on to a couple other tasks. So like I said, we created a service account. Those service accounts need specific roles in VCenter, NSX, VROPS, and Horizon, the 4 supported products. So in VCenter, there's a handful of permissions that we would grant this user. So to do that, we'll go into our vSphere client, administration. We'll look at the role provider. We'll hit the plus sign, create a new role, and it needs, so read only, it needs global.license, diagnostics, health, and settings.
Hey, Brian or Nick, I'm just curious if you've heard of anything around adding a role or having a default role just for Skyline from like the CPBU or anything like that. Maybe that's something we could suggest.
Yes, definitely a suggestion we can roll up from a default settings. Just noting that those could change over time. So as you know, obviously with a role, those are only added during product upgrades or updates.
Sure.
So it helps create a little bit of flexibility. But yes, that's taking notes now that we can roll that up to product management for as a feature request to the different business units.
Cool, thanks.
Cool, so we'll say finish to that. We now have our custom role. So we'll toggle back over here to like hosts and clusters view. We'll pick a VCenter. We'll add our TAM Lab Skyline service account, and we will grant it the Skyline role. Okay, so that's all we need to get started with one VCenter, but we actually have two VCenters, so I'm going to do that same step again. Maybe try that one more time here. So these are two vCenters in enhanced link mode. So the creation of that one role should propagate over here automatically after some amount of time. Last time I did this, it was almost instantaneous. But to keep the show moving here, we'll just use that that previous one we created. So now we have our service accounts with access to both vCenters. The appliance finished deploying, so I will go turn it on real quick so it can be booting up.
Quick question, what is the use case for having more than, or having a multiple collector?
So in this lab, the first one was deployed simply to start collecting data before today's session. In like the real world, I've got a customer who would want to deploy two, one for like their data center 1 and one for their data center 2, like because they're in geographically different areas. I don't know, Nick, do you have any other scenarios where someone might want to deploy multiple ones?
No, you're spot on. So the first being different geographies, no sense in sending product usage data across a WAN or VPN from one data center to another. The only other place where a particular team could possibly deploy multiple collectors is if they wanted to, we call it organize or basically segregate data. So for instance, the VDI team only wants to see VDI data for their particular cluster data center, vCenter, and the server team only wants to see data in Skyline Advisor for their managed environments, and they want to keep them separate with separate user access and teams. In that instance, the VDI team would deploy a collector and tie it to their organization, and then the server team would deploy a collector of their own and then tie everything to their organization and basically keep everything separate, even though they're basically the same company. That would be the only other really true use case to deploying multiple collectors.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Well, what about VMC environments? So if a customer has, a VMC SDDC, would they even want to consider deploying Skyline, or is it totally handled already because it's a service?
Yep, not today. We don't technically support VMware Cloud on AWS, so like deploying the collector inside of VMC, it wouldn't, since we control, it's a different, offering operational model.
Sure.
We don't have rules within Skyline for making recommendations inside of VMC. So technically, we don't even support VMware Cloud yet.
But that's from a vSphere perspective. So what if they deploy like VROPs up in VMC? They may want to collect data against that, right?
Technically, they could. There would be nothing stopping them from doing that since it is just an OVA or OVF. Yeah, technically it's true. Yeah.
And they'd probably want to deploy it in VMC to avoid egress charges.
Yes, yeah, it's close to. Yeah, as close to those as possible. And then again, yes, taking into account that the collector does need to talk to the internet, so there would be egress data.
Okay, thanks.
And then I guess in that vein, are there any limits to the number of collectors that a customer could deploy? Like if they had 10 different locations or something in different states or regions, could they deploy 10 collectors if they needed, or is there some sort of cap on that?
Not that we've run into. Our largest customers deployed 38, or no, I'm sorry, we have one customer that's deployed, I think 16 with another 10 coming. So yeah, really no limit that we've run into yet with deploying a large number of collectors.
There was one thing, Nick, that I just wanted to mention. You said that was for product usage data sending over WAN links. Actually, the concern is because the product usage data is only about 32 megabytes to 50 megabytes. It's a log bundle collection.
Oh, yes.
Those log bundle collections will be sent through the collector and up to the VAC system and then over to the GSS script servers. And those can be upwards of 10 gigabytes. So you don't want to send those over WAN links. And for the collector itself, there is no actual technical limit for the number of endpoints you can have or VMs. It's all we have customers that have tens of thousands of VMs going through a single collector.
And just to clarify, that is a recent change. I seem to recall at one point there was a limit of like, I want to say like 5 solutions per collector, or maybe 10, and that is like a newer version kind of a thing, right?
As of I think it was 1.5 or 2.0, we stopped doing in-memory collection. So, and it does it on a batch process as well. So it batches those 10 endpoints and does not store it in memory when it does the collection. So that was a change that the platform team made.
Cool. All right. So yeah, keep questions coming. If anybody has a question, feel free to interrupt. We've got our vSphere role done. So next step is to do a similar thing for the audit or for NSX. So, and correct me if I'm wrong or if there's more products, but the 4 products that I know that Skyline collects data on today are VCenter, NSX, Horizon, and VROPS. And fortunately, we have one of each of those in this lab. So I want to go through all of those systems and grant all of the access. So that the next one is NSX.
So it does vSAN as well. vSAN is turned on via vSphere, and it's a different endpoint that's created when it recognizes that vSAN is configured, but you don't have to actually technically do anything.
Okay, cool. We do have a vSAN cluster in this lab too, so good times. All right, and then I do believe that NSXV requires that if you want to grant a user permissions to something that you do it in the Flex client. So I'm gonna fire up that Flash client and wait for it as well. Again, I'll pull up this one article. There's the Skyline docs are really good, and I've got direct links to all of these things to add a vCenter, NSX Manager, Horizon, all that stuff. But it does call out what permissions we need. So NSX was kind of the trickiest of them because it calls out this KB article on granting API permissions. And so I've got the steps to do this as well, but we have to like open the terminal of the NSX managers and type some things in, and this one's probably the most complicated. So we'll probably just do one of the NSX managers for the demo. If you have more than one, it's just kind of a wash, rinse, repeat sort of thing. I should have thought ahead and been logged into the Flash client. It's good and slow. All right, while it's doing that, I'm gonna go ahead and fire open Horizon.
While those are loading, just a quick question around compatibility. So if we go to our compatibility matrix, is Skyline included in that? Like, can we check, versions of Horizon, versions of NSX that it's supported with?
Not within the compatibility matrix. Our compatibility from deploying the collector is basically any supported VMware solution. So if you're deploying it on vSphere, 6.0 or above, really where the compatibility comes in is the endpoints we collect as well as the rules we write. And we have some control over that. with regards to data collection and writing rules. Sometimes a new collector is required. So for like Horizon and VRI's operations, collector 2.1 is required to collect the data from those different endpoints. And we do call those out within our release notes, which versions we support from a data collection perspective. However, James, you got anything else to comment there from adding, for instance, new versions of VRI's operations or Horizon as they come out?
No, I mean they should all work, but it is a good note to put it to put it into the compatibility matrix for when customers easily checking to see Skyline 2.2, it starts supporting VROps and Horizon where 2.1 doesn't, and what versions of VROps and Horizon. It's actually a good recommendation.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got the web clients open. We'll go through this NSX piece because it's the trickiest of them. So from the Flash client, we go to users and domains, and then we will add in a user with the auditor role. So the user is TAM Lab Skyline, and it needs to be an auditor. We'll hit finish. And then, so I've got a customer who claims they didn't do these steps, and it seems that things are working in in Skyline with regard to NSX. I don't know, James or Nick, can you guys speak to this? Is this something we do need to do?
You can just use the admin account if it's a lab.
Okay. But this is something that customers would want to do where they go through and create these individual API permissions?
Yeah, the customer would need to do this if they want to have a custom user. That's
okay.
The goal of the guide is to give that additional API role.
Okay, well, it's not that tough. So for demo purposes, we'll go ahead and do it just in case people have customers that ask for it. We can do this. It's not time consuming. It's not crazy. It's just a little bit extra here.
Yeah, I've got some customers that they say, oh, we'll just use administrator at vSphere.local or the admin account, and they don't care. Other customers are very diligent about setting up service accounts and all that. So I guess it's going to be, depends on the customer, right?
Hey, James, would a customer need to do this if they used an account and gave it the NSX administrator role, which is needed for log assist?
They probably don't. It would only be a read-only account.
Okay, so that's worth pointing out is auditor by default with the API process here. However, for log assist functionality to collect logs from the NSX Edge devices, we do require NSX administrator, a service account with that built-in role, in which case a customer would not need to walk through this particular process.
Okay.
And that's called out within that 59661, that particular knowledge base article.
Okay.
So just worth noting here on this presentation.
Yeah, I'm just reading through here. Actually, let me drag this over here real quick. So this KB article basically calls out that if you want to use a custom user, you have to go through these extra steps. But I don't see where it says that if you have admin, you don't need this. And it wasn't super clear in here either, or at least I didn't pick up on it. I did see that if I wanted to support log bundles, I needed to be an administrator. but it didn't say if I had administrator, I could skip this step.
Oh, that's valid. We can update our documentation.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Yep, we will update that.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, no worries. So I've got the instructions up on this other screen here, and we'll just run through them real quick. So we say enable, we do type our password. Let me look at one note here and see. Cool, got my password right. We say user, and then we put in our username, which was TAM Lab Skyline, and then password, plain text, and then our password. Oh, but I skipped a step. Config terminal. Let's try this one more time. All right, enable, configure. All right, well, I think we're going to skip that step because yeah. One more time here. Enable.
It says up top your number lock is on. I don't know if.
Yeah, the password doesn't. It's got a 1 in it, but I'm not using the number pad. I had everything kind of tested out, but I had a power outage yesterday and had to kind of scramble to get everything back up. So I haven't actually logged into this since then. It's no big deal. What we'll do.
You can use the admin account.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. We'll go in here and we'll still use our service account, but we will give our service account admin rights. So that should be this guy right here. Edit and NSX administrator. Okay, so we'll go with that for now, and then we'll jump over to Horizon. In Horizon, we just need administrator read only, so we will add a user or group. We'll add our user called TAM Lab Skyline, and we will grant it the role administrators read only, and I'll just give it everywhere. And then last step in VROPS. In VROPS, I believe we have to create a user account. I can't import one from Active Directory because, and we'll get to this here in a second, Skyline only allows us to type VROPS hostname, username, and password. So there's no place to put in an authentication source or something like that. I already talked to Nick about that. I think he can request in for us. So we'll create our account. And we will give it a read-only account. We'll assign it everywhere. All right, so good news, we've got all of that stuff done, and now we can actually get into our Skyline console. It's actually already powered up and all that good stuff.
That was the host IP you grabbed.
Good call. I was going to say, that doesn't look like the interface I expected. All right. So this is one thing that did trip me up the first time I went to set this up, because I wanted to log in at, well, I'm not going to admit to this, but I may not have read the documentation. And I tried to log in as root because I set a root password during appliance deploy, and I put in my password, and that's no good. The actual username is admin, and the password is the word default, all lowercase. And that's actually in the documentation. That's where you'll find it if you forget. But as soon as you log in, it asks you to change your password. And so we'll change it real quick. And then we just need to log in again. So now my root and admin passwords are the same. So once we get into the appliance, the first step, we can test connectivity, and we can see that connection was unsuccessful because in my lab, NSX blocks outbound stuff going to the internet unless you specify a proxy server. So we'll do that real quick. And then when we test connectivity, everything should be successful. So this is, built in there for customers who may have policies similar to the one I created just for this purpose. But when they test connectivity, if they do not have a firewall rule open or outbound internet access allowed, it will fail right away and won't let them get kind of far into the process and realize things aren't working. It fails immediately. And the documentation calls out either using a proxy server or there is a firewall rule that your customers can add to let traffic go out. But we'll use a proxy for this example. We'll agree to our CEIP terms. And now we need a collector token. So we'll go back to these instructions here. So this is where it told us to install and configure a collector. The next step is to actually register the collector. And this is where we need to create that token. Like Nick said, once you create one of these, it's good for 12 hours. We can just copy this token value here. It starts 00DD. We'll go make sure we get the right value pasted in here. Start 00DD. Good stuff. We hit register collector and tells us that we were successful. Now it says if we need to create appropriate accounts and credentials, do so now. We already did that because we knew it was coming. Here's where we give the collector a friendly name. And this is just, if a customer has multiple collectors, this is what's going to show up in Skyline as far as, if a collector has a problem and one's down, so they'll know which one it is. So, if you had, site 1 and site 2, that'd be a great name to put in here. I'm going to actually just use the same host name that we used for the collector because that's as creative as I am. The next step is to decide whether or not you want the collector to auto upgrade. I can't think of a good reason why you wouldn't want it to just take care of itself. So we'll go ahead and turn that on. We'll pick a time that's not just the standard time. We'll set our configuration, then we'll just move on. So the one thing about, I think, Steve, you called this out, if you had VMC on AWS and you wanted to collect from VROPs only, I don't think that would work unless you had a VCenter somewhere that you were connected to, because it looks like the workflow will stop here and not let us continue unless we specify a VCenter.
You can skip it. If you just take out the register on the top and go back into that page, it will actually be a registered collector with no endpoints, and you can.
Oh, clever. Okay, cool. So let's do that.
I don't know if you guys feel that should be kind of a feature request instead of a hack, where you can continue without the vCenter.
The workflow, so I was only going to add one vCenter, and then I was going to like skip these optional steps and then go back and add them. So like, if you're looking for feedback, I guess my opinion would be ending the workflow right here after auto upgrade would be fine, and then I just go to configuration and add stuff.
Yeah, the thought would be to have maybe vCenter be optional as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More
I would
recommended,
agree.
where you can click continue.
But yeah, so let's we'll just go back to this IP. That is clever. I just assumed that a vCenter was required, so I was just going to add one, which is fine, right? Like, I think most customers would have one. So cool. So we'll add in a vCenter. This one's vc1.example.com. Our user account that we created was tamlab-skyline VMware1 ! If you have external PSEs, I think you need to check this yes box and type in the info of those. I used to have external PSEs. I don't anymore. There's a TAM lab on how to get to embedded PSEs if you'd want more info on that. But I do not have that configuration, so we'll just leave it off and we'll let it collect from all data centers.
Hey, real quick, before you click add, can you uncheck that bottom one? I just want to see, does it show?
Well, let's see what happens here. Let's go ahead and add it that way.
You probably only got one data center, right?
In this vCenter, yes. In the other vCenter, no. So it doesn't trust the certificate, so we'll just tell it that that's cool anyway. Go ahead and add it.
That's cool, though. It gives you the granular ability to exclude certain data centers.
Yeah, I didn't try toggling that button before, so we'll have to. Okay, so yeah, this is the one data center that's in that vCenter.
Nice.
So we'll just go ahead and enable it, and then we can add another vCenter that will be a better example of that because it has more than one data center in it. TAM Lab, Skyline. So it shows 4. I'll click all of them and unselect this test one here. And we'll just get 3 of the 4 of those just for fun.
And just a quick time check, Brian, you got about 6 minutes left.
Oh, it's plenty of time.
Okay.
So NSX Manager, we already kind of did the permission part, but it's just like adding vCenter. We just hit add, we type stuff in. Same with Horizon, same with VROPS. All of that's actually done. If a customer needs to go in here and change their proxy server, they can. The collector name can be changed here. I didn't try and configure Active Directory authentication. I think there's Nick mentioned something about anonymous bind was required, so I didn't mess with that. But if I go back to system status, it shows that I'm getting stuff from 2 vCenters. If I had done, we'll go in and we'll log into this other collector that we had pre-configured just to show everything added. So NSX Managers, Horizon, VROPS, you just, same process, add an endpoint, type in the host name, the credentials, and it should check out with those permissions we gave it. And then if we go back to the Skyline workflow, we can kind of skip through some of these things. We've registered our collector, that's good. Managing existing collectors, it should show 2, the one that we just registered, plus the one that I had previously registered. They should both be listed in here. And we'll just skip on to the next thing. Skyline Advisor, right? So this is where customers would go to get access to their data and what has been collected and sent back. This is the view that customers would see, it would show their collector. This is the collector that we had pre-deployed. It shows some of the endpoints that data is being collected for at least the vCenters and NSX managers. It does give us the inventory of what's going on in some of those environments, so we can drill in and see hosts and what build they're running, for example. I think this is might be a new feature for the 2.2 release, but we can hit like a vSAN checkbox, and we can see which clusters have vSAN enabled hosts in them. So that's kind of neat. Same with NSX. But then proactive findings is kind of the meat of it. This is why a customer would likely want to deploy something like this. I thought my lab was in decent shape, but I did find a handful of things that I didn't know about. There's a bug with VROPs requiring the latest version of VMware tools. And so I can actually drill in and see that I've got a couple templates that actually have old tools in them. So if I wanted to address this incorrect memory usage metric bug, I could go in and just update tools on these two VMs. I can get more info by clicking on the KB article, that sort of thing. We can dig into more of these if you want. There's just about 3 minutes left, so I'll probably not dig into any of them unless there are specific questions. We'll just open it up if anybody's got a question that's end-to-end to deploy, configuring the organization, deploying a collector, creating the credentials and permissions in all of the separate endpoints, and then kind of waiting until the data populates, which we kind of faked out by doing some of these in advance. And then this is what Skyline Advisor would look like for customers.